So today we're going to be transplanting some tomato seedlings up into larger pots. I'll show you how to do it, why to do it, when to do it, and all that good stuff. Let's get started. So these plants did get a little larger than I would want before I transplant them, but life gets busy and they're gonna still be okay. So let's go take care of these guys. So I have all of these seedlings in these little cells that I need to transplant into some bigger containers. I always like to go at least 2 times as big as whatever they were currently growing in, and so these will definitely do the trick. However, I don't have many of these left. So I'm going to be transplanting these guys into bigger pots. And for them, I simply have cut off water jugs that I've poked holes in the bottom. So this is a nice size container for them to grow in for quite some time. You can use pretty much any food safe container that you have as long as you poke some holes in the bottom for drainage. Like here I've just got this beverage container that we cut off and popped a tomato seed in it. I've used all kinds of containers. You just have to make sure it has good drainage in the bottom and that it's food safe. So on this plant you can see the little hairs. Everywhere there's a little hair, roots can grow. So I'm going to be planting this probably up to here. I don't think the container is deep enough for me to plant it higher, or I would plant it higher. I will go ahead and snip off these bottom leaves because I know for certain they're going to be covered in soil. But I'm going to plant this in a container, something like this, but it's going to be a water jug so that I have a lot of depth to put this little fella in. So I've got some Oregon Springs here that I'm going to transplant into these big guys. Then I'll use their pots to transplant my little cell tomatoes into. And tomatoes are so easy to transplant. They're so forgiving. So I'm just going to put a couple inches, or like an inch, just a little bit of soil in the bottom. And then I will be popping this tomato. We've got a little buddy right here too. I think I'm going to go ahead and save him. Let's see. So what I do is I just gently hold the stem, pop it upside down, and pull it out. And if you look at the roots, they're not over compacted, so that's pretty good. I'm going to pull this guy out and give him his own pot. Okay, so down we go with this one. This tomato will likely show a little transplant shock. It will probably droop a bit for a day, maybe 2. It'll perk right back up. Tomatoes bounce back pretty easily. A question people have sometimes is when to transplant your tomatoes. And I would say once your tomatoes start having the roots come out of the pot that they're in, you want to get them into something larger. I'm going to slightly tease the bottom of these roots. Just kind of pull them apart a little bit. It's the reason we want to transplant them when we start to see the roots is the plants can only grow so large as the roots have room to grow. If I never did transplant it, eventually what would happen is the roots would get so compacted inside the pot that they would no longer be able to take up nutrients and water, and the plant would die. You also want to make sure that they have their first couple set of true leaves. These first leaves that pop up out of the ground are going to fall off. They turn yellow and fall off, and that's normal. Don't be alarmed. The next leaves that come up are called the true leaves. They're the leaves that actually look like the tomato plant. So you want to have at least a couple sets of those true leaves before you pot up. Now when I fill it with soil, I go to the very top because when you water it, it's gonna pack it down a little bit. I usually water from the top the first time, and then after that I water from the bottom. I just set this in a bucket of water and let it absorb up into the dirt, and the roots will take it up. It's really important with tomatoes to water them from below. You don't want the water splashing on the soil and the soil splashing up on the plant, because the soil can contain a variety of pathogens that can give the tomatoes diseases and stuff. So watering from below is ideal. When you put them in the garden, we put down drip hoses so that it's just, the water's just dripping into the soil and there's no chance of them splashing up. We also have a cover over our tomatoes because it rains a lot where I'm at, and so the rain is not going to splash the soil up onto the plant. Another thing we do is trim off the bottom 6 to 8 inches of leaves, so that if for some reason that water does splash soil up, there's a less likelihood that it's going to actually get on the foliage, because if those spores get on the foliage, it will cause disease on those bottom leaves and it'll just travel up the plant, and you don't want that. It can wipe out your tomatoes pretty quickly. You can plant several seeds in one container, and if they all germinate, just gently pull them apart and plant them into their own containers. I'll show you. Alright, so this seedling has 2 plants in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently break apart the roots. They're very, very close together. It's much nicer when they're a little farther apart. They break apart a little easier. But I do want to have 2 plants in 2 separate pots. So I'm just going to very gently break these apart and give them both their 2 own pots. And it's gonna be hard on them. It's gonna give a little bit of shock to their little systems, but they should come out okay. Tomatoes are pretty resilient. This one has quite a bit of roots still. This one has quite a bit of roots, but lesser, but they'll be okay. So I'm gonna plant it down pretty deep. I don't use garden soil for this. I always use compost or potting soil that was purchased. Now this one has a lot of roots. Ideally I would have got it transplanted earlier, so it wouldn't have so many roots. So in this one I'm going to go ahead and I'm just gonna tease the roots out a bit. There we go, and then I will be planting it. Whoa. I'm gonna actually be planting this one in this bottle, because I don't think that's gonna give it quite as much room as I'd like it to have. So this seedling has already been potted up once, but it's getting pretty big. There's my finished product, looking pretty good. I'm sure its little roots are so happy to be out of that confined little case, and now I need to go put it back into the grow tent. If you have limited room to be raising seedlings, you'll want to start your seedlings about 6 to 8 weeks before you can actually put them outside in the garden. Otherwise they're going to get pretty large, and every time you pot them up it takes up a little bit more space. So I have a grow tent here at the school, so I was able to take my larger plants in here, and then at home on my shelf I have the smaller plants. The main thing is that they get enough light and they don't get too cold. Now, in order to know what time you can place them out in the garden, you just need to know when your nighttime temperatures quit dipping below 50 degrees. Tomatoes don't like it colder than 50 degrees. So Google average temperatures for your zip code. It'll give you month-to-month data as to what your average high and your average low is for your area. So when your average low is 50 degrees or higher, that's when it's safe to put your tomatoes outside. Now, I started these plants a while ago, about 8 weeks ago, and they're already starting to blossom. So I just transplanted these out yesterday into these larger containers. They were previously in the water jugs, and then I put tomato cages in here to help give them some support. And these will be reproducing, all of these are getting, every single one of them is getting some flowers on it. So they're going to be producing tomatoes before I can get my tomatoes outside into the ground. So these were all transplanted yesterday from the 4-inch pots to the gallon pots. And with these, you can see they're a little wilty. They're all a slight bit wilted, but I think by tomorrow they're gonna have perked up and look pretty good. It doesn't usually take very long. These were looking worse this morning. They're looking even better this afternoon than they did earlier. So it doesn't take them long to perk back up and be happy little fellas. So go ahead and subscribe if you want to see more garden videos, and that's all I've got. So until next time, see ya.